There's been a lot of talk in the news about renewable resources. It's become a very popular topic on the news as we wade through the debate about man-made climate change and the effectiveness of legislation on carbon emissions. I have many friends who are always talking about the advantages of going green and touting the benefits of renewable energy sources, and I honestly didn't know a lot about it myself, so I decided to do a little research, and I thought today I would break down the very basics when it comes to renewable energy and its advantages and disadvantages in comparison with coal and natural gas. First, we need to know a little bit about renewable energy sources. What are renewable energy sources? Well, a renewable energy source is any naturally occurring, theoretically inexhaustible source of energy that is not derived from fossil or nuclear fuel. This includes solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, biofuels, and also hydroelectric energy, and several others that we use here in America. But those are the main ones we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about solar energy. So solar energy is of course energy gathered from the rays of the sun. It's gathered by photovoltaic cells, or PV cells. These PV cells are then grouped into a small cluster of interconnected cells called a module, which is then packaged into a larger framed group called a panel. These are your solar panels that you see all the time. You see these a lot, especially here in Hawaii, on the top of homes and various buildings. They help cut down a lot on the cost of power that we get through the grid, so that's good. These panels consist of two sheets of silicon connected by a conductor. One of these sheets is doped or treated with something to create purposeful impurities. It's doped with phosphorus, and one sheet is doped with boron. The sheet doped with the phosphorus is called N-type silicon, whereas the sheet doped with boron is called the P-type. This doping is done to create more movement of free electrons. It works like this. Phosphorus has one more electron than silicon. So as the phosphorus bonds with the silicon, it has an extra electron. When heat is applied from solar energy, these extra electrons break free and they search for a place to bond. Boron, on the other hand, has 3 electrons versus the 4 of silicon, so there are empty spaces to fill. These free electrons move from the p side to the n side. The electron flow creates current, while the electric field created between the panels creates voltage. This current and voltage together produce the power. Wind is harvested using wind turbines. They look like giant fans. I know you've seen them going towards North Shore. If you look to your right, you'll see the big fans out in the distance. What those are the wind turbines. What a wind turbine does is as the wind blows, it turns the fan's blades, and as the fan's blades turn, it also turns an engine, which gathers this energy. It changes the wind's kinetic energy into mechanical energy. Another way to gather renewable energy is using geothermal energy. Geothermal energy can be used directly to cool or heat homes by using underground water pumped through pipes through a home to heat it, or conversely allowing this water to absorb the heat from the home during the summer months and return it to the ground. Geothermal energy is also used in geothermal power plants, which uses steam from hot water reserves under the ground to turn turbines to produce electricity, much in the same way as a wind turbine. As the steam cools, it reverts to water, which falls back into the underground reservoir. Another renewable energy source is bioenergy. The idea behind bioenergy is gathering all the food waste and farm waste and changing that into something that can be fed to a bacteria to break that compost into a gas, which can then be burned to create electricity. And finally, hydroelectricity, which is using running water to turn turbines, much like the wind and steam that we talked about before. We place these in dams, and that way when the water runs through the bottom of the dam, it turns the turbines, which creates power. So those are the major renewable energy sources that we use in our country right now. Unfortunately, right now, most of our energy comes from things that aren't quite so renewable, such as oil and coal. Coal is a solid biomass formed from the carbon of dead plants and animals that has been under pressure for thousands of years. Coal is mined from the earth and burned to create energy. Using coal in this way has a multitude of advantages as well as disadvantages. Coal is very cheap and very abundant, and it's easily mined and transported. Unfortunately, it's not only a finite source of energy that's scheduled to run out sometime in the next 50 to 100 years, But it also involves a lot of dangerous mining, which causes a lot of unnecessary injury and also a lot of long-term illnesses, such as the black lung. And it also releases a lot of greenhouse gases as it's burned. Oil, or petroleum, is a liquid form of fossil fuel. It's found buried in the earth and must be drilled for and then pumped out of the earth. Oil is extremely popular for several reasons. It's cheaper and much easier to drill for than mining for coal. It has a very high energy density. And on average, 1 kilogram of burnt oil gives about 10,000 kcals of energy, or 40 megajoules. Unfortunately, oil also has several disadvantages. Oil is even less eco-friendly than coal. Being that it is highly explosive under pressure, there is always a risk of fires and explosions, not to mention oil spills. There have been several major oil spills in the U.S., the largest of which was an explosion on a rig off the shore of Louisiana in 2010. When the rig was destroyed, it created an oil leak for 87 days that released an estimated 210 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. This chart lists the 10 largest oil spills in U.S. history. Each of these oil spills does unimaginable damage to the surrounding ecosystems. Birds and fish are destroyed, along with coral and other sea life. The long-term effects do damage to fishing, recreation, and tourist industries, not to mention permanently altering the fish and wildlife populations of an area. Another way to harvest oil from the ground is fracking, or hydraulic fracturing. Fracking is the process of ejecting a mixture of water and chemicals under high pressure to fracture deposits of shale that contain oil. To fracture a well, frackers use up to 8 million gallons of water for a job. This water is then mixed with 40,000 gallons of various chemicals. There's a few worries about the effects of fracking on neighboring communities. Fracking breaks up shale deposits into the ground and has the potential to cause tremors and possibly contribute to sinkholes. Another danger of fracking is contamination of groundwater. All those millions of gallons of water and various chemicals could be soaked up into the groundwater in poison wells. Many people have protested fracking near their homes and cities. Pennsylvania received 398 complaints of contaminated water wells around drilling sites in 2013 alone. So what chemicals were we pumping into the ground at rates of millions of gallons at a time? Well, it's hard to say. Many chemicals are used. Some that have been identified are lead, uranium, mercury, ethylene glycol, radium, methanol, hydrochloric acid, and formaldehyde. It's hard to identify all the chemicals used because drilling companies are very secretive about their mixtures. North Carolina, which just lifted their ban on fracking, even went so far as to draft legislation calling for criminal charges to be placed on anyone who reveals these chemicals publicly. The final version of this bill called for this disclosure to rate as a misdemeanor, but originally they had wanted to make revealing these chemicals publicly a felony. So as we've seen, coal and petroleum are advantageous because they are cheap and easy to harvest. What about our renewables? How do they measure up? Well, herein lies the problem. Our massive dependence on coal and our soaring energy consumption all but guarantee that it will be a long time before we could ever afford to cut the coal cord. With 37% of our power coming from coal, and only around 18% of our power in the United States coming from all of our renewables together, to completely replace coal and natural gas, we would need to replace 67% of our current power production. This is the Copper Mountain Solar Facility in Nevada. It's a 150 megawatt photovoltaic power plant constructed in 2010. And it cost around $141 million. And to replace just the coal we use in this country, we would need to build around 7,529 of them. Solar energy is free and infinite. The problem is, when the sun's not shining, it isn't collecting much power. And we don't have a very efficient way to store the excess energy that the solar panels and turbines take in. Not to mention that wind farms and photovoltaic facilities would be far from residents, and therefore the energy would need to be transported long distances, just like coal is now. This wastes a pretty hefty amount of energy. Building all these facilities would create many jobs. If we went solar alone and built and built those 7,529 facilities, it would contribute nearly 119,780 temporary jobs in the U.S. Unfortunately, it would only produce about 37,645 permanent jobs. Compare this with the approximately 349,600 jobs lost due to the collapse of the coal industry in the U.S. It doesn't look very good. Moving to renewables would not be cheap or easy. I started this assignment wanting to research all the benefits of renewable energy. Unfortunately, what I learned was that we just aren't there yet. Wind, hydroelectric, solar, biofuels, they're all great, and they're improving all the time. Unfortunately for the moment, they aren't cost effective enough to supply the energy we would need. Until we can find a better way to make solar and wind cheaper and more efficient, and until we can find better ways to store energy, we will continue to rely on coal for the bulk of our energy. This doesn't mean that we should pack it in and forget it, however. People across the country are using turbines and solar panels to reduce, and sometimes even do away with their electric bills. Many homes using these technologies actually overproduce and add electricity to the grid. These are how these renewables are most efficient right now, supplying direct power to individual homes and being backed up by the city grid when they aren't producing. If we can encourage more and more families to use solar and wind turbines, we can not only keep incentivizing research in solar and wind technology, but we can also reduce our reliance on city power and maybe even reduce our overall energy consumption from coal and other less eco-friendly energy supplies. Maybe producing on a smaller scale in more areas would serve us better. Maybe that would eliminate the need to transport this energy from one place to another place in long distances and reduce that excess power that we waste. Maybe it will be the next idea that changes the way we go about solving these problems. Maybe it's just a matter of changing our thinking. Just because we can't yet afford to make the change completely, doesn't mean we shouldn't start placing more importance on heading in this new direction. Most estimation puts the world's reserve of coal being completely diminished in the next 100 years. That's the span of a single human life. If we are still dependent upon coal for 30% of our power when that happens, we will have a crisis on our hands. We should start now. Not to cut out coal, but to start building and increasing our knowledge and improving our technologies that help harvest these renewable energies. That way, when the coal goes, we will be ready to throw down the crutch and stand on our own with clean and efficient, reliable, and permanent energy for our future generations. My name is Justin Hubbs, and I appreciate you listening today. Thank you for your patience, and I hope that you learned something. Have a good day.